Hello and welcome back to BookTube with Amy. Bit of a different setup today because it's going to be my mid-year goals and stats check-in. So we'll go through all my stats that are up to date at current time of filming and just see where I'm sitting. I'll talk you through my goals again and we'll compare where I'm sitting versus my goals. I know for a fact I'm doing better at some than others, and I just show you all of my stats, I guess, and where we're sitting. I started some new stats in May, and I decided that I wanted to track how I was reading, so physical versus audio versus mixed versus ebook. And I also wanted to track what I'm reading that is indie published versus traditionally published as well. And I don't have goals for them yet, but we'll probably set goals for them next year also. So let's just jump in. I'm very excited. So these are my general stats. So my gender split, I always try to be reading more female authors than I am male authors, which is something I find pretty easy to do with the amount of YA fantasy that I read, to be honest. But I have read 36 books by female authors, which makes up 68% of my reading, 14 books by male authors, which makes up 26% of my reading, and 3 books by non-binary authors, which makes up 6% of my reading. And I'm really happy to see some non-binary authors in there, because last year I didn't read a book by any non-binary authors, which was quite disappointing. And I've just found a couple of non-binary authors this year that I've really enjoyed. I've really enjoyed Sarah Gailey. I've really enjoyed Emily Lee. So I am really chuffed with that. And maybe next year, when I reset my goals when it comes to gender, I'll have like a specific non-binary target that I would like to hit. In terms of my ethnicity, I said that I would like to read 15 books this year by BAME authors, and I would like to read 12 books this year by Scottish authors. I am doing terribly on the Scottish one, so I've only read one book so far this year by a Scottish author, and that was Mayflies back in January for my Fiction Addiction book club that I host with Ange over at Angie's Book Chatter, and that has only made up 2% of my reading. So I know I need to put more of a focus on that for the rest of the year. I know that I've got at least 3 books that I want to read in the August that are by Scottish authors, so I know I'm going to have a couple then, but I need to get seriously better at that. I'm going to lose my Scottishness rep the tag on the channel if I don't actually start reading some more books by Scottish authors. And then my BAME goal, I'm really pleased. I've actually read 14 books so far by BAME authors, and that's sitting at 26% of my reading so far this year. So I'm glad I'm making more of an effort with that. Like I say about 1,000 times, I'm a mood reader, so I do just pick up whatever it is that I fancy reading. But if I have a goal in mind, then it'll maybe make me gravitate towards some books more so than others. And then for white authors, I've read 38 books by white authors so far this year, and that has made up 72% of my reading. In terms of my queer versus not queer split, I'm always happy for that to be 50-50. If I was to have a preference, I would prefer there to be a wee bit more queer than non-queer, but this is the first time I've actually read more non-queer books than queer books. But with this being Pride Month this month, I'm sure that'll push it back a wee bit more evenly. So I have read 29 books so far this year that have been non-queer, which makes up 55% of my reading, and 24 books that were queer, which make up 45% of my reading. So these are the main sort of stats that I track, to be honest, is gender, ethnicity, and whether the book's queer or not. So then if we go into my about the book, so this really surprised me when I was looking at this earlier. So the top category that I have read the most of this year is cozy mystery. I've read 13 cozy mystery books this year, which is wild to me, considering a couple of years ago it wasn't even a genre that I read from, and I didn't know it existed really. It wasn't something that I was seeking out, but apparently I'm an addict now. And then next up is YA fantasy. I've read 10 YA fantasy books. I've read 6 graphic novels. I've read 5 literary fiction books, which I'm really happy about because I have made an effort to be trying to pick up some literary fiction this year. I've read 4 horror books. I've read 4 paranormal romance books. I've read 3 contemporaries. I've read 3 fantasy books. I've read 3 middle grade books. I've read 1 classic, and I've read 1 thriller. So quite a good mix of genres there. I feel like I'm trying to branch out, and I'm obviously doing like my Try That Trope challenges so that I can be trying different books and different genres, reading for different authors that I maybe wouldn't have ordinarily picked up. So I am happy to see that there are a bit of a mix of genres there, and it's not just fantasy and horror like it usually is. And then my series versus standalone. So I have my I seriously need to finish this challenge where I try to finish all of the series I currently have started, and then there's also some series that I plan to start and finish this year. And so I always want to be reading more series than I am standalones. And I've read 37 books that are part of a series this year, which makes up 70% of my reading, versus 16 books that are standalones, which makes up 30% of my reading. And the dog has just joined me. Hello. And then in terms of my format, this is quite a new start for me. I only started tracking it in May. So I have read 22 books by audio this year, which makes up 42% of my reading. I've read 17 books physically, which makes up 32% of my reading. And then 14 books I've done a bit of mix. So I've done some audio, some physically, and that is 26% of my reading. I'm pretty happy with where that sits. I'm quite busy. So I do quite like an audiobook to have on, and it means that I can do other things and crack on while I'm listening to my audiobook. So I'm not going to set myself any goal as to where I want that to be. I know that some folk can get a wee bit snobby when it comes to an audiobook and it's no daily reading, etc. But it doesn't bother me. I'm happy to consume books via audio if it means that I can still continue to read and talk to you guys about books. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. And then my traditional versus indie published is another new start. And so I don't have a goal set for this either, but potentially might set something next year. So I've read 47 books that were traditionally published this year, which makes up 89% of my reading. And then I have read 6 books that were indie published, which has made up 11% of my reading. And then I know that Indie August is coming up, and that's totally going to skew that, and I'm going to be reading far more indie. But I'm quite happy with that. Like 6 books so far is basically one indie book a month, and I think that that is quite decent, to be honest. I know that there are people who maybe wouldn't even manage to read that much, and considering it's not something that I've been actively trying to pick up, I just tend to read quite a lot of indie. I'm really chuffed with where that's sitting. So if we jump into my ratings, I have rated my Scottish authors, that one book, 5 stars. My white authors I've rated 4.32, and then my BAME authors I've rated 3.29. And the reason for my BAME authors being so low in this round is there were 2 series in particular that were YA fantasy series that I was reading by BAME authors, and they started off as pretty decent reads, and then they just petered off, but I wanted to finish the series, so I know that that's why that is as low. I think if I was to pick up some literary fiction on my shelf that I have, or some other fantasy by BAME authors, that would probably crank its way up. But as you can see, my YA fantasy is like my lowest rated genre at the minute, so that's how they link together. And then in terms of my gender, I rated my male authors 4.57 stars overall, my non-binary authors 4.33 stars, and my female authors 3.83 stars. So considering I have read majority female authors, like I think that that's fair, because you're obviously going to get authors who you just haven't enjoyed the book, and those odd 1 stars or 2 stars are just going to pull you down. And then in terms of my queer rating, I've rated my queer books 4.13 stars and my not queer books 4 stars. I tend to predominantly rate queer books higher, and they're from like such a wide range of genres and different authors. So I didn't know what it is, but I love me a queer book. And then in terms of my indie versus traditionally published, I've rated my indie books 4.67 stars versus my traditionally published at 3.98. And now I know that a lot of that's obviously going to be again because I've read predominantly traditional, and so that's going to have had some books in there that's pulled that down versus the 6 indie books that I've read. But I do typically find that I rate indie books a bit higher, if it's fantasy or if it's horror. They're really the only 2 sort of indie categories that I read from predominantly, but I do find that I tend to rate them a wee bit higher. And then my series versus standalones. So I've rated my series books 4.11 stars, which is good because it means I am enjoying finishing series. And then my standalones are at 3.94 stars. And then in terms of my genres, classic 5-star, thriller 5-star, paranormal romance 4.75, middle grade 4.67, cozy mystery 4.54, fantasy 4.33, literary fiction 4.2, graphic novel 4.17, horror 4, contemporary 3.33, and then YA fantasy all the way down at the bottom at 2.80. And I feel like this is always so interesting because I feel like the past few the past year or so, tracking my reading and sitting down and doing these catch-up videos and like talking to you guys about my stats, that YA fantasy always tends to be my lowest rated, but it's what I naturally gravitate towards picking up. And I didn't know if I've maybe just evolved a wee bit as a reader, and so I don't enjoy YA fantasy so much anymore, or if it is just because I consume so much yet and have consumed so much yet over the years that I rate it a wee bit harsher than some of the other genres that I read from. Like if it's a newer genre, then maybe I'd be a wee bit more lenient on it. Whereas because I read loads of YA fantasy, I'd rate it maybe a wee bit harsher. So just interesting. I have no answers. It's just interesting. And then my DNFs for the year. So I have DNF'd 6 books by white authors. I've only DNF'd white authors this year. I've DNF'd 5 books by female authors and 1 book by a male author. And again, that marries up with the fact that I'm trying to read for more female authors. So I'm obviously going to have more chances to DNF a female author. All of the books that I DNF'd were not queer, which I think is so interesting. Like, I wonder if there was a wee bit of any of these books that would have been queer, if it would have made me continue to read. Like, just, again, no answers, but it's just facts there. 6 of the books that I DNF'd were traditionally published. 4 of the books that I DNF'd were standalones, and 2 of the books I DNF'd were part of a series. I DNF'd 3 YA fantasy books, 1 crime thriller, 1 literary fiction, and 1 non-fiction so far this year. And then in terms of my page count, I never set myself goals. I'm like, all right, well, I read this last month, so I need to read this much this month. I just don't track page count, really. I read an all manner of books. I read really chunky books sometimes. I read really thin books sometimes. I'll pick up what I fancy reading. I think that if I was to set a page count, a goal per month, or even for the year, it would just really stress me out, and then I'd probably feel like I could only pick up big books, and I didn't really want to do that to myself, so I don't. But this is where I'm sitting so far at current time of filming for the year, which actually isn't too bad at all. If you look at some of the longest books that I've read so far this year, in January I read Call Down the Hawk, which was 472 pages, and that's by Maggie Stiefvater. And then Dorothy Must Die in February, which was 452 pages, and that was by Daniel Page. And then The Magician in February again, that was 464, and that's by Michael Scott. And then we have Wolfsong this month in June, and that coming in at 494 pages, so the biggest book that I've read so far this year, and that is by TJ Klune. So that is where we are sitting so far for this half of the year. I'm definitely going to need to put more focus on reading them Scottish books. So if you have any books by Scottish authors that you're like, Amy needs to read this, comment down below. You can let me know so that I can pick them up, because I'm feeling, but I'm pretty happy other than that one stat where everything else is sitting. And I feel like the challenges I've set myself for this year, we might seriously need to finish this challenge. No so much my self-destruct, because I'm doing rotten at that. Stay tuned for both the catch-up videos later in the month. But I feel like my reading's in a really good place. I had a pretty couple of slumpy months at the end of March and all of April, but I feel like I've came back and I've been getting back into my reading. I've read some absolutely dynamite books this year, and I am just happy with everything sitting apart from my Scottish author stat. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you're enjoying everything that you're reading at the moment. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.